Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you this morning.
Good to be back here, Dr. Paul. How are you?
Good. All getting ready to try to stop a war.
That's right. We have to.
Of course, when I'm looking at what's going on now in Iraq, it's an ongoing war.
Yeah.
We had tried to stop it one time significantly in 2003, 2002, when they debated the whole thing. We weren't very successful at that because we were involved. We've been involved a long time, you know, over there, especially in the 1990s. We had the Persian Gulf War and then the Iraq War, and there was a relative pause there of peace, but not a pause for the empire.
Yeah.
Our empire has been very, very busy. And it looks like just as our foreign policy has been under attack in various places around the world, people are getting tired of us. And we've talked about that a lot. And the empire might be running out of steam. And right now, this is another example of this because there was a skirmish and bombing and killings going on. Not like 2003, but significant. But the prime minister had to leave, and it's more anti-American sentiment than for a long time. And of course, what I think about is, you know, the wars. The justification for war, spreading democracy, spreading American exceptionalism, show them how a free and prosperous society works. And when you think of what the results are, I mean, everything from Saddam Hussein that we propped up and we prodded him into an 8-year war with Iran way back. He was our proxy. But here it is again. It's happening. There's been missiles launched and people died, and of course Iran. It was all Iran's fault. You know, they did it. So we had to retaliate because an American contractor was killed. That's significant, but 7,000 miles away from home, and we're still dropping bombs and trying to maintain order in that country. I would think they would get a failing grade if they were being on a grading scale on how successful the foreign policy is. I think the neocons would come up short, but they're still around. I understand Pompeo's still around. Yeah. He's interested in what's happening, but it's a little bit hard to prevent what's going on. But how's it going to end? We have to try to get people to support a more peaceful relationship. But of course, my argument has been that for Washington, D.C., with the crowd that's up there to wise up and do the right thing, slim chances of that happening. And I think what is going to happen, though, is we won't be able to afford it because we're gaining nothing from this. Yeah. And guess what? It keeps pumping up the budget, all this activity participates in that $1.4 trillion budget they just passed. So it's ongoing, but this thing is difficult because there is more killing, and it may spread in retaliation against the Shia, who they said did this, initiated the bombing. They had to bomb in Syria as well, So it is a region. It is part of the empire. It's their way of maintaining the empire, pretending that it's being done to spread American democracy. A charade.
Yeah, a charade is right. And this latest uptick in violence, though, is significant. And that's why we kind of titled it 3.0, because we've managed to alienate and completely infuriate the current president of Iraq, which is more of a ceremonial position, the acting prime minister, who had to resign because of the U.S. encouraged protest against him recently, and now even the top cleric, Sistani, condemned the attacks. What happened, just to step back a few days, is on Friday there was an attack by the popular mobilization units. This particular one was Kataib Hezbollah. And these are the groups, you remember, these are the militias, the Shia militias. They first went into ironically, they first got into action fighting ISIS. That's what they were doing. But on Friday, one of these units attacked an Iraqi base, at least according to the U.S. claim, and the contractor was killed and an American who was in the base was injured. The U.S. then on Sunday retaliated with attacks on 5 different positions, killing 25 individuals, wounding 50, at least that. saying that this is a retaliation for the attack. And then they said, of course, as you suggested, the real guilty party is Iran, because Iran is backing the popular mobilization units, the Shia militias. Iran says we didn't have anything to do with it. But this goes again, Dr. Paul, to the U.S. policy of shoot first, ask questions later. We had no evidence provided. We just had Pompeo up there saying they did it, Iran did it, and that's why we hit him back.
But I think the strongest comment I heard coming from the Iraqis is America is jeopardizing their sovereignty. They're interfering with the sovereignty of their country.
Yeah.
And we're pretending that's what we're supposed to be doing, creating a country that's democratic and they have their own sovereignty. So that's why they're opposed to us. But that always happens, and the people who defend the homeland essentially win in the end. Just like as no matter how long that war lasts in Afghanistan or how many centuries, the people who want to live there and be left alone usually win the battles, and they're ongoing. And I think that happens just about every place. So that's why we will lose. We are losing. And I think it has a lot of significance to this, because if we worry, and they do in Washington all the time, because the enemy are those Russians and those Iranians, and they're talking to the Chinese, and they're building pipelines and highways, and we have to stop it. And they're determined to do all this. But our policy, prods them into doing it. Why don't they go and invest in it? That's more or less what China does. They don't go in with armies. They go in with investments because they earned a lot of money selling us stuff. and they're very, very much involved. But this whole idea that there has to be confrontation, but the more I look at this and study it and try to understand it, profiteering in the military-industrial complex is probably more powerful denomination than I ever dreamed. That is what they want. They want to make profits, and they do, and they're in charge, and they're connected to the media, and this is ongoing. This is either going to be totally ignored, or if you don't support it, if we're caught not supporting all this stuff, who knows? We could lose our Twitter account.
Yeah, exactly. Well, while Americans aren't paying much attention, the unrest in Iraq has increased significantly over the past several months. There have been weeks of stories, Pompeo being the chief purveyor of these stories, that Iran is moving missiles into Iraq. This is a nefarious thing. But I think the answer should be, so what? They're neighbors, they're allies, they work. We move missiles all over the place, don't we, among our allies?
Right.
But it's presented in a nefarious way. And of course, the lapdog media covers it exactly as Pompeo wants it framed. I did a quick survey, just a Google search, which will tell you what everyone is thinking in the mainstream. Iran, everything is being blamed on Iran, this whole thing is. So the media is lining up exactly as the administration, as the forces of the empire would like it. But they don't understand the significance, I don't think, or they're certainly not reporting the significance of what is happening, because these PMU forces, these Popular Mobilization Unit forces, are part of the Iraqi government security forces. This is not the Montana militia or some group of guys in Texas somewhere wanting to secede. This is part of the government. So the U.S. military flew F-15s over and attacked part of the Iraqi government self-defense forces. It's significant, and that's why they've mobilized support away from us. They've mobilized antagonism toward us. And it all, as you say, would have the unintended consequences of just turning everyone against us.
Well, in a way, these militias, militia, has all kinds of connotation, but the militias were responsible and not being friends with the terrorists, and ISIS. So they helped to clean up some of that mess. But our policy actually does the opposite. We're more likely to have terrorist attacks against us, for us being there. So it doesn't make any sense. But it doesn't make any sense for our country to be doing this. It doesn't make any sense for the American people to totally ignore it. But the whole reason is not the people in this country. How many times have you run into somebody that's not too much into politics and say, I don't know too much about it, boy, but I'm sure glad that we're bombing people, and that we retaliate and we don't get pushed around. I don't think there's very much of that, but it's incessant too. I don't know which country gets the most negative news. Not that they deserve only good news, but they deserve an objective viewpoint, and that is Russia and Iran.
Yeah,
I mean, there are members of Congress, Democrats and Republicans. Can you believe it?
Yeah.
They think that the best way to get votes in this country is to bash Russia.
Yeah.
You know, the more you bash Russia, the more votes you're going to get. Even Pelosi and those other ones, they do that, which makes no sense whatsoever. It's almost like, you know, for me to stay here and be a congressman and to be important, I have to take this position. I have to bash the right people, and you have to bash Iranians and you have to bash Russians. And right now, of course, they're a little more cautious with China because China's a bigger force. But you have to bash China too, or you could be said to be un-American. You got to defend America first, you know, this sort of thing.
And how ironic when those thousands of missiles, as you've said so many times, the thousands of Soviet missiles were aimed right towards us. There was a debate in the U.S. There were plenty of people that talked about détente. Even Nixon talked about détente, getting along with the Russians. And now that they have, that there is no Soviet threat, and then Russia is a completely different country. But, you know, this is the irony, and you mentioned it again, of our policy is pushing together. It's having unintended, or maybe the intended consequence, I'm starting to wonder, of pushing our enemies together. And just as we speak, these past few days, there have been some significant naval operations. The Iranians were able to get the Russians and the Chinese to join together and have some naval operations, some naval maneuvers in the Persian Gulf. We are pushing them together. Who knows, maybe that's what they want to do. Maybe that's the idea, but that certainly is the result. The U.S. isn't about to go over there and start blowing up Russian ships in the Persian Gulf.
You know, take the position, too, that we have to show our strength by going into the South Sea of China. But what would we do? You know, the old saying, what would we be doing? What would the Americans saying if the Chinese and the Russians had to have a show of force in the Gulf of Mexico and started building an island on there, dredging an island? You know, it would be a little bit different. But we can go any place around the world. But that's what empires are all about. And the one thing empires cannot stand is the truth about things, and that's why, you know, the whistleblowers meant to tell us some of the bad things going on and reveal it and be protected. That's why they are too often put in prison before they're praised and rewarded for their heroism for telling us what's really going on behind the scenes. And it's constant that there's always somebody who's going to reveal the truth. So sometimes it's way too slow, and sometimes you think they'll never hear the truth, but it's generally, you know, comes out. You know, I just think how long it took most Americans to understand what the Kennedy assassination was all about, which is a big event in our history, a lot bigger than some people realize. Yeah,
exactly. And you mentioned earlier the 1980s Iran-Iraq war. Of course, the neocons loved that because they loved having both sides killing each other, and 1 million people died. You know, a lot of gas attacks. It was a horrible thing. And I'm thinking about this. I'm thinking about this ratcheting up the tension and violence in Iraq, and I'm wondering if the U.S.'s plan is to plunge Iraq back into civil war with the intent of drawing Iran in. You know, they had, once we liberated Iraq, of course, it descended into a bloody civil war between the Shia and the Sunni, and it seems like the fact that the maximum pressure campaign on Iran is really not working. In fact, as we mentioned, they're getting closer to others, they're getting more allies, that if this isn't really their plan B or plan C or whatever it is, okay, if we can't hit Iran this way, we're going to go ahead and push them back into civil war, plunge them back into civil war. We'll blame the whole thing on the Iranians. The media will report it just like we want it, and boom, there we have our war.
You know, maybe some of them still dream of the day of Saddam Hussein when he's our ally and we give him nuclear technology and he will resist the Iranians. At the same time, he was a Sunni and a minority in that country, but with an iron fist was able to maintain order. And I imagine, the West, the Brits and the French and Americans all liked that. You know, they were maintaining order, and the Iraqis or the Saudis were protected, and we got the oil, and the oil dollar relationship was created and existed. But see, that's coming to an end. So we talk a lot about these particular events, but the big event, I think, still is the countries that are thinking about and working on how they can develop an alternative to the dollar. And in the midst of a crisis, who knows what's going to happen, who's going to pick and choose. I don't think in the midst of a huge financial crisis, the dollar is going to get stronger. And if the dollar gets weaker, our empire is weakened. And maybe we'll start thinking about, the good things about what America used to be about, and that we could concentrate on that for a change.
But I'm sure all the people we've been poking in the eyes for all these years will be kind to us after the dollar is no longer good.
Yeah.
Well, the final thought that I wanted to bring up, and I think this is important, is that the Defense Secretary, Esper, called up Mahdi, who's the acting prime minister. He resigned, but he's acting. Nobody wants to take the job and replace him. Esper called him up about an hour and a half before the bombing and said, hey, we're going to bomb some sites in Iraq. Mahdi said, please don't do it, call off the strikes. They said, no way, we're going to do it anyway. So that really does make it a hostile strike. It makes it a U.S. attack. The president, as you said it's a violation of our sovereignty. So it really is, it comes down to 3.0. Militias are not going to take this sitting down either. There are some, however many, 5,000 troops in Iraq. They said they're all targets now. We're going to retaliate. So neocons, again, in their bloodthirsty obsession with Iran, have opened a can of worms. The Trump, I don't even think he has a clue what's happening. I don't think he even knows the implications of what's going on. So it's, unfortunately, we're ending the year as we started it. More war, more bombs, the threat of more war. Trump doesn't seem to know what to do or who to listen to. So we're back where we started, but we are making progress. And that's why I would say today is the 30th of December. I would just remind all of our viewers to make, if it's in your heart to support the show, to support the Liberty Report and the Ron Paul Institute, you have until midnight on the 31st of December to have your contribution, your tax-deductible contribution, count towards your 2019 taxes. So you keep a little bit of money out of the war machine's pockets and put a little bit of money in the anti-war machine's pockets and help us keep the show alive. Go to ronpaulinstitute.org/support. It's in the description of the show. There's a link. If you could go there and make the most generous support before the 31st at midnight, it'll count to this year. You'll get a little bit of your money out of Washington's pocket, and you'll help us keep the show alive. And we appreciate your support so very much.
Very good. You were talking about these factions in Iraq, and there are so many, and they're fighting against each other. And I just thought, you know what? Probably both sides have weapons that we produced. Both sides, they get money from us, and then they shift, they change sides. And I saw a report where they were talking about sending some troops or weapons. We needed them in Libya. Remember Libya when it was messed up with Hillary Clinton? They had to leave, and they went up and stirred up trouble in Iraq, in Syria. Now that Syria's settled and everybody's peaceful there, at least things are different. So, we really want to fight, so we're going to go down to Libya now. So they don't want those aggressive fighters doing anything, so they're sending them back, and it just backfired. Our policy backfires on us. And when I say this sometimes, that why do they do it? I get comments by some people, and they say, Ron, you're too naive. Some of this stuff's on purpose. It looks dumb, but sometimes it's antagonism. They want to contain the fighting and all. And I can see that, have an enemy, but not as much, cut back on the killing. We can still make a lot of weapons. And if we're providing weapons for both sides, how can we get a better deal? The worst thing is we have to send in the money to buy the weapons. And that's why, of course, we run up a deficit, of $23 trillion and over $1 trillion per year now, and it's going to be over $2 trillion in no time until the dollar quits working, and that's what we're facing. I think in the year 2020 that we may see a significant change in the overall confidence and value of the U.S. dollar, and this will be an overriding event over the military. I think it'll be secondary, and that'll be a big deal. I think it's coming, and we should all be prepared. Of course, nobody knows when and how it'll be and how it'll transpire, but we do know one thing. We can't continue to run an empire, run up these deficits endlessly, and try to control the world. eventually ends. And eventuality, I believe, is just around the corner. So the answer for me is to explain and defend the valuable principles of liberty and the valuable principles of minding our own business and letting people at home prosper, have free markets, instead of what we do. And we see the changes occurring, but unfortunately what we hear and see now is coming, and they're further left. They're Marxists and communists and socialists all coming in. But the truth is, there's a lot of people like you out there that know and understand what's going on more than I ever dreamed of. And that was my significant discovery in the last 10 years or so. There's a lot more friends for liberty out there than I ever could imagine. So that's what we're doing. We're building up slowly but surely the number of friends of liberty, and that is the only thing that will make a difference. That's why we will keep working with the Organization for Peace and Prosperity. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.